Security. We might, but I don't know if the emergency is I think the emergency is not a fire. When they're yeah, they might come. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. You're on your 2-minute warning. Find your seat. We're going to do the prayer for the meal very shortly. So get your folks in here, end your conversations. Stop playing your games on your phone. Kidding. I wasn't looking at Heather McCorster over there.
Are you familiar with that show? You're doing two ferns? Oh, you gotta watch it. Sure, what do you want me to say about
Everybody else.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just introducing. Taylor Fleming.
I thought you wanna play a few numbers. No? Good. 5-minute notice.
Good to go. We're right at 5:30.
5:30.
Gotta see the prayer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call upon the stage Elder Gilbert Francis to say our prayer for our meal. For the meal in the evening.
For the meal and the meeting, opening prayer.
Thank you. So I'm gonna say the opening prayer and after I'm gonna say the Lord to help us for the future. Thank you. Ade akenagaha insnia se tigero ne toada yaming tene rangina onkia wenra onsigitina dagun ogitsigia onkiabo. Ye ne sinksiwina wenra nabuna yo insnia singen yengabit. Esinagaha wa tabitene wa te wa no insnia. So
during our dinner, we're going to have Taylor Fleming. Taylor is a fiddle player. And she's from Manitoba. She first started learning the fiddle when she was 9 years old through the Manitoba Métis Federation and the funded fiddle program, and she instantly fell in love with it. So today she's grateful for all the opportunities she's had and in all of the places that she's been promoting Métis culture through the art of traditional Métis fiddle music. So I'd like to welcome Taylor Fleming, and she's going to play for us during our supper. Yes. At this time, I'd like to introduce the CEO and the chair. This time, please welcome. I'm just looking for our notes here. Jatan De Silva and Cassie Doyle and Tracy Sledo. Welcome and enjoy your meal. Thank you. You may begin. Thank you for coming. So we have the 5-minute warning, 5-minute warning. We'll be starting in 5 minutes. So I'd like to thank also our fiddle player. She comes from Manitoba, so let's give her a round of applause. How was your meal? How was your meal? Give a round of applause to the chef. Thank you to all the chef, waiters. Thank you. Starting in 5 minutes. Yeah, we're good to go. Yeah. Thank you to Taylor Fleming.
Thank you, Tyler. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce our MC for the evening, our host with the most. What did you call me? Just kidding. So I just wanted to introduce John Snow. He'll be facilitating tonight, and let's welcome him.
I want to thank the committee of the IAMC. I was fortunate to come into the committee about 7 years ago. One of our chiefs had announced the committee chair, so I was the co-chair for the first committee with Joe Daniels. So I served at that time, and so I've been able to have the good fortune to come back and help with the committee. I've helped as a resource person. I've helped as a co-chair, and I've also helped with instruction. One of the wonderful things we did with the committee was we got training, and some of the training came through Indigenous Visions, Carol Crow. Some of the training came through other institutions, Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. And it was the IAMC and some of the leadership at the time, Chief Todd Pagan, had recommended that I would not only chair, but also approved our training as members of the committee. So I was able to take the pipeline monitoring from SAIT and then also take the pipeline operations. So today I'm one of the instructors at SAIT and have been teaching a number of the First Nations in our different classes. So I'm thankful to the committee for that ability to do that. I just wanted to quickly again recognize the CEO, Gatan de Silva, Cassie Doyle, as well as Tracy Sledo. They were here to provide some support for the IAMC committee, and these are the staff and the leadership from the Canada Energy Regulator. So we thank them for coming. Give thanks to Taylor Fleming, and thank you for attending with the buffet. And at this time, we're going to have a few welcoming remarks, and we're going to also ask the panelists to begin coming up, as we have a bunch of panelists that are going to be making their way up here. They have a lot of experience on the IAMC committee, and so I would ask the panelists to begin. And also wanted to welcome in-person audience and virtual attendees. Thank our elder Gilbert Francis. Thank Taylor Fleming, and also introduce myself. I am Stony Nakota. I am working right now on the unmarked graves in BC and Yukon. I've been working a number of years with land, environmental training, traditional and cultural assessments. So I'm an instructor for many universities and colleges. Also, I just wanted to introduce that this session will be recorded. If you have questions on the recording, you can talk to the staff. So talk to the event staff. Maybe event staff, can you put up your hands? So all the event staff, put up your hand. So these are the event staff that are supporting our event today and tomorrow. If you have any questions, seek them out and ask your questions. Just wanted to make sure that the phones are turned silent. Sometimes we'll have all different types of call tones on the video, so please turn your phones on silent. For those who need, the restrooms are located in the front when you came in. The restrooms are in the hotel lobby. The muster point, so if we have an emergency, the muster point is in the front and to the right in the parking lot. So that'd be the muster point in the front of the hotel in the parking lot. And then I just wanted to provide opening remarks. Thank all the participants for coming. The goal of this evening's session is to provide reflections by the panel, and we'll be introducing the panel shortly, on Crown consultation on the roles of Line 3, the Indigenous Advisory and Monitoring Committee, and the CER's Indigenous Advisory Committee and decommissioning. So we'll be approaching this in the form of a panel. And so we would also have virtual attendees have instructions. If they have questions, they can put them into the Zoom chat box and hit send. And you can also go to the Menti website and type in the code to ask your question. So if there's an opportunity for asking questions, you can do that virtually, or we have 2 mics that you can come up during our question and answer period session, and you can pose your questions at that time. At this time, I would also invite the committee to come up, the panelists on our group. I'll just introduce them as they're coming. We have Richard Asakin, Line 3 IMC Indigenous Co-Chair from Cowessess. We also have Kyra Northwest from Samson Cree, Marcy Riel, Manitoba Métis Federation, Mike Sutherland, Peguis First Nation, and Jonathan Timlin, the VP of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation at the Canadian Energy Regulator. So as I said, the 2 mics in the front will be used for asking questions. And for those who have mobility issues, you can ask to have the mic brought to you. And as I said, the typing in of the questions can be done in the Zoom chat box.
So how can I see that?
At this time, we're going to have question 1. And so this will be the panel discussion with the Canadian Energy Regulator, the Line 3 IAMC Indigenous Caucus members. And we're going to have 30 minutes for each topic. So we have a number of note takers, Leslie Sin, Melissa Kelly. The Zoom monitor is Shelley Alexander. The mics is Tony Snow. And we have another facilitator as well, having the mics. And so we will begin with question 1. We already did the introduction. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll be
Under
starting
Mike's
with
leadership.
question one, and we're all mic'd up
Are
here.
you gonna do the video?
We invite you to take a few minutes as Mike Sutherland from Peguis First Nation, Manitoba, shares perspectives on the CER's role in Section 35 consultation. Mike is a member of the Peguis First Nation in Treaty 2 and is the current director of Peguis's Consultation and Special Projects Office. Under Mike's leadership, the office has participated in over 30 environmental projects at the regional, provincial, and federal levels.
One of the biggest disappointments I've seen is when Canada gave the responsibility for Section 35 process on federal major projects to the CER. And to me, that's a total conflict of interest because the CER is the regulatory body, works with the proponent, then has to come and sit with the affected nations. And so now they're playing the role of the regulatory body to ensure that the conditions are met by the proponent and the issues are being dealt with that the First Nations or the Indigenous nations bring forward. But then they're playing the role of government on the Section 5 process, right? And going in there and consulting with the nations, you know, and bringing the proponent with them in regards to the projects. So, you know what, they're playing a dual role there. They're playing both sides of the fence. Do I go up there?
Yeah.
Oh.
Mike Sutherland, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Mike. Thank you.
Uju Dancy, Mike Sutherland, Dejani Cause, the Donkamani Walking Buffalo, and I'm a member of the Wolf Clan. And my spirit, my warrior name is Brown Cougar Warrior. And I'm from the Peguis First Nation in Manitoba, not Peguis like P-E-G, not Peguis. But it's kind of ironic because, you know, my community, our signatory chief was not Peguis, it was Pekawis, meaning little chip. And so over the years, I guess it's been bastardized by colonization and, you know, misrepresentation and not understanding our culture and our history and our language. So it had ended up as the word Peguis, but that was not his name. It was Pekawis with a Q, right? And this is what our elders always stressed to us, you know, as we met with them in sharing circles, that we have to understand where we come from and who we are. And, you know, our signatory chief was not named Peguis, it was Pekawis. So I thought I'd just share that. But the clip that I made there is so important to me and to our communities because a lot of our First Nations communities don't understand this whole process, right? They don't have the capacity as well when dealing with government and industry, you know, and this whole process should be a principle of natural justice where administrative proceedings should be conducted in a manner that's fair to everybody that's involved, right? And to me, that's not a fair process. You know, this process is a conflict of interest, and any discussions or recommendations by the CER is an insult to the principle of natural justice. Because they're playing both sides of the fence. They're playing a dual role in this process. There's no independent body. You know, and the decision makers must be truly independent and not have any kind of interest in the matter and must be seen as independent. But if the CER plays a dual role in this process, then they're not independent because they're the regulatory body and now they're also leading the Section 35 process. You know, and any discussions and recommendations, I think would bring the administration of justice into disrepute. And this is not just my notes, but, you know, I have a committee at home and with our elders and our knowledge keepers and our staff and so on. And I talk to this about a lot of people. It's not just me that raises these issues, you know, of the way this whole process is rolling out. It's just something that we look at all the time. Manitoba, there was a interim consultation policy from 2009 to 2017, and it worked okay because there was an independent body leading that process. On December 28th, 2019, the province changed that policy. And they have a new policy in place, which gives the departments themselves the ability to consult. And to me, that's the worst conflict of interest I've ever seen, because forestry, Manitoba Transportation and Infrastructure, they could all consult on their own behalf. So, you know, how is that a fair process? You know, and you take a look at the regulatory bodies here in Canada. Right now, we're dealing with a process in Lake Manitoba, Lake St. Martin channels, right? And the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada is a regulatory body. Now, they're also in consultation with the First Nations. But just recently, the Manitoba Transportation and Infrastructure Department for the province requested a 18 months extension because their EIS is not complete. And if you understand this process, an EIS should be complete before Section 35 even starts. But the province has been amending the EIS as time went on, and the whole scope of work has changed. So now MTI asks the IAC, the body, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, can we get an extension? And they grant it. So is that a fair process, I ask? It's not a fair process, because when we, in August, there was 11,000 page document that we had to review in 30 days, right? But here's the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada giving the proponent an 18 months extension to get their ducks in a row. You know, when we take a look at fairness and equality, right? And you hear it all the time at the Supreme Court, right? You know, if we were treated right, if we were given that fair opportunity to be consulted, you know, is it meaningful? And that's what we have to look at in this whole process. Is it meaningful? And to me, the CER, the regulatory bodies out there, CER, IAC, it's not meaningful when you're playing both roles. It's not meaningful to us and to our people, right? But I think the biggest thing that really strikes me is the fact that a lot of our nations don't understand this. We ask ourselves, well, show me where Canada gave the CER and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada the authority to consult on behalf of this federal government when they're already playing a role of the regulatory office. I have yet to see that document. You know, so how could they have that authority to consult with the nations on a project, a major project, when we can't see the authorization that was given? When we start a consultation project in my community, and we're sitting in the room with supposed to be representatives of the Crown, I asked them, do you have the authority to make decisions? Do you have the authority to issue accommodation measures and so on, and tell the proponent this is what you have to do? And if they say no, then I said, I'm sorry, but you have to leave, because this is a nation to nation process. And if you're not the person that has the ability to make those decisions, then you shouldn't be sitting at this table. And go back and bring your minister, deputy minister, somebody that has the authority to be responsible for decision-making and to move forward with this engagement process so that it's meaningful. And a lot of our First Nations don't have the capacity or the financial wherewithal to challenge this. Last week, I was at a mining workshop, training workshop, and a mining conference in Winnipeg. And Bill Gallagher was there. He's a lawyer out of Toronto. And he was kind of bragging for us, saying that since that Section 35 process started, I guess, or the lack of it, and there were Supreme Court cases, there's been 337 cases across Canada with First Nations and Canada at the Supreme Court level. And Canada hasn't won one. You know, and it sounds really good. It does, right? Canada hasn't won one case, but in actuality, if you look at it in a pyramid type of thing, at the top here is your 337 cases, but there's probably 10,000 below that couldn't even get to the table. They didn't have the financial wherewithal. They didn't have the capacity in their community to fight for their rights, to make sure that they were treated fairly and meaningful. And that's what I said to him. I said, you know what, Bill, it sounds good, but you know what, underneath all that, there's 10,000 First Nation issues that never even made it to that table, made it to that Supreme Court table. And I said, we have to think of those First Nations. You know, this process with the CER and Enbridge and this pipeline, you know, it's to me, it's not a fair process, you know, and those of you that participated in this whole process, Enbridge will come and say, man, there's opportunity here, you know, jobs, and you're gonna build capacity. And then everybody's excited, and then, oh, but you gotta pre-qualify, you know? Then you gotta be able to meet these bid process and be within 5 or 10% of the bid mark for what we give you and what you're gonna bid upon. So there's 26 First Nations, Manitoba, and maybe 2 or 3 are now at the table to participate in the Line 3 project. How meaningful is that? It's not, right? So this whole process has to change, and it has to start with the Section 35 process, and it has to be meaningful. And the entities that play that role cannot be playing a dual role. They have to be independent so that the First Nations and it could be treated fairly and justly as they move forward with this process. With that, I'll say miigwech. Thank you for your time. And do we give the other panelists an opportunity to answer? Right, eh? Okay, thank you very much, folks.
I'd like the other panelists to come forward. So thank you very much, Mike Sutherland. And we'll ask Richard Sakin to say a few words about this question. And the question is, what are the key considerations for the CER, the Canadian Energy Regulator, in taking on Crown consultation role?
Good evening. My comments will probably be very short, but one of the things that I notice about consultation efforts by the government is that it's not prescribed. There's nothing there as far as process in place and process that is fair, that will help rights holders actually intervene in an oversight way to truly give consents to projects. And one of the things that has to be in place is not a dilution of those consultation processes. This committee is not one of those processes, and we don't presume to be taking over that role. But what I'd like to see as a elected councillor in my nation is more authority to help make decisions, to review, to document, to provide advice, to consider major projects in our region. And any project that happens in Treaty 4, Cowes wants to be a part of that. We want to know what's going on, and that should be part of the consultation process. It shouldn't be whose capacity is better or who talks the loudest and who shows up at the table or at the meeting. It really should be closer to the legislative process, closer to cabinet. And so as rights holders, we're a fiduciary responsibility of the federal government. And so what we want to do is have that nation to nation relationship. And the CER has been unofficially that delegated authority in the past. It's just now that they're actually officially that delegated authority as a consultative partner. And we don't want to have to be like in a horror movie where they're throwing all kinds of chairs at us to get in the way of our process, of our consent, of our wanting to know and wanting to be a part of things. So the consultative process should be built on relationships, and relationships that are moving forward, and relationships that are maintained, and relationships that are prescribed. Like I said, there has to be a clear, fair process for the government of Canada to engage with First Nations, not superficially, but as a nation to nation. And what I'm talking about is when Canada communicates with the United States, they have diplomatic notes. So they write diplomatic notes, they send official correspondence, they're received and there's responses made. That's the kind of process that we need with nations to the federal government. And the CER can be a part of that process as they are the delegated authority, but they're not the decision maker. The decision maker is the nation, and the decision maker is Canada. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Richard. Thank you. I'd like to call on Jonathan Timlin. Jonathan Timlin is the Vice President for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation at the Canada Energy Regulator.
Hey, everybody, and I apologize. I'm going to stand up here just because I can't see a chunk of you guys over there if I stay here. First of all, I just wanted to thank the panelists and thank Gilbert Francis the Elder for opening this up in a good way. And it's great to see so many faces. It's great to see people from the neck up for a change. I'd forgotten that there are so many legs in the room that I haven't seen in a million years. And I appreciate also the reference to horror movies and how invariably I'm the one that's introduced after someone starts talking about a horror movie. So sorry about that. So yeah, no, it's going to come as a surprise, but there are so many things that I agreed with from my colleagues, Mike and Richard. And I'll tell you a bit about who I am. So my name's John, fifth kid of a big family. I'm from Ottawa. I don't normally like to say that because people don't normally give you the kindest reception when you say you're from Ottawa. So I normally say now I'm from Calgary. Been here for 10 years, love it. And 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to start working with the Canada Energy Regulator. So for those of you, I know most people have a bit of an idea what the Canada Energy Regulator does. And my colleagues up on stage could write the book about what we do. They know us inside out. But I would just say that we are the ones that we set the rules for industry who construct and operate pipelines that cross provincial borders or that go down to the States. And we also deal with some power lines that go down to the States. And I know Marcy in particular knows a lot about the power line side of the business. So we're a part of the government of Canada. And as I said, our main function is to make sure that there's clear rules for those organizations that undertake that work and that we are holding them to account. So that means that we're out there in the field, we're boots on the ground, we're monitoring what they're doing, we're making sure that they're preparing for if there's ever an emergency, they know how to deal with an emergency, that we're dealing with construction and operation matters, making sure that when they construct a pipeline, they're doing it in a manner that satisfies our regulatory framework, which includes environmental standards, integrity standards around engineering, and then also increasingly now, as part of our legislation and as part of the work we're doing, a number of issues that fall in the socioeconomic sphere as well. And that's been a huge change for us over the last number of years. When the CER Act, the predecessor of it, most people heard of the National Energy Board, and that was what we used to be. And our acts hadn't changed in decades. And frankly, it was really just based on the Railway Act from the 1800s. It was an old piece of legislation. And it wasn't until the 70s that environment even was brought in to the concept of our regulatory oversight. So, it was really just a focus on, land acquisition. It was a focus on, construction standards and safety standards. But environment matters that we've increasingly dealt with. Like I think of Mike Oka, who's been so eloquent and such a leader in helping us understand matters related to cultural heritage, sites of Indigenous significance. Ray Cardinal's here from the TMX IMAC as well, and I've learned a lot about culturally modified trees. We've got Jay Dewar, who's an Indigenous monitor from the Red River Métis, who's been out on site with our inspection officers. This is tangible changes in how we do our business, and what this has done is it's led us to be a more effective regulator. Now I'll speak to Crown consultation. I don't want to use up all the time, but I'll just say that so as part of the CER Act, which came into force in 2019, Parliament, Cabinet deliberated, Parliament passed legislation that made the CER what's called an agent of the Crown. So that is where our responsibilities for Crown consultation come from. Now, are we perfect? Am I perfect? Absolutely not. There's so much that we need to do to improve. And it's through work like this and relationship building that we're actually able to grow and to learn, right? So what we did was we have a commission, which are independent decision makers. They're appointed by Cabinet, by the Government of Canada, and they make decisions on applications that come in. And what they do is they hear from everybody who wants to come forward, but in particular from nations who are potentially impacted by, normally that's when my team starts to pull the fire alarm, just want me to be quiet. So that might have been I think it was our sound guys. But anyway, yeah, so so the commission has to hear from those who are potentially impacted, Indigenous nations who are potentially impacted by the project. That's fundamental to the duty to consult, right? If there's a right, if there's a potential adverse impact, there's a duty to consult, and that's part of the hearing process. Now, what we've done to evolve in the last couple of years as we've taken on the role of agent of the Crown is then we've added another stream to our process as well, where we have some of our dedicated staff in the organization, people who are so utterly committed to reconciliation, who then also work in a parallel stream, while ensuring that the tribunal has natural justice and procedural fairness. But the other part of our shop, they deal with Crown consultation directly, and they'll meet with nations as well. So nations have an opportunity to be heard in front of the panel, the commissioners, and they have an opportunity as well to participate in meaningful dialogue with our staff. And both the commission and our staff are working to identify, okay, so what are the potential impacts? And then what types of accommodations necessary to mitigate those impacts or deal with those impacts? And the commission does that through their process, where they can make the proponent follow, like the commitments that the proponent makes during the hearing process become part of the proponent's responsibilities. And then in addition to that, the commission could also put conditions on the project. And what we saw with the Enbridge Line 3 project, there was 89 conditions that covered a gambit of things, including matters related to engagement, matters related to Indigenous monitoring, number of environmental conditions as well. And then with this new Crown consultation rule that we have, we're also, our staff are also in those meaningful discussions with nations. They're also then able to go back to the commission and say, hey, commission, we think you should be adding this to the requirements of industry as well. So it welcome. So it not to put you on the spot, but it yeah. So it's an opportunity to we've done it with one project now. We've had the West Path delivery project, NGTL gas project, that has gone through our process now formally as an agent of the Crown. We're adapting, we're learning, we're growing, we're going to get better. This is only the beginning of our new role as the Crown consultation lead. But I just wanted to, acknowledge the comments that Mike said and say, I understand, like, I know there's concerns about how we do our work. We've had many years in Canada where we haven't done this well, and we haven't been respectful, we haven't done meaningful work. And that's part of reconciliation is acknowledging the past harms and know that those are barriers towards the future. And then working in an open and honest way to addressing this issue. So I spoke probably for way too long, so I'll turn it back over to John and see if any of my colleagues want to.
Yep, thank you, Jonathan. And I'll give you your notes here.
Oh, thanks. They're too
I'll
small.
just ask for Marcy to come up and say a few words if you'd like. And, oh, you're going to pass? Okay. And we'll get, Kyra's going to come. Yes, she's going to say a few words. Kyra, Northwest from Sampson.
Everybody, Kyra Northwest, Natigason, Virginia. Scott, now I'll talk to you. So good evening, everybody. So in terms of this question and the things that I've been thinking about being and working for a nation that has gone through the new Crown consultation process, I kind of felt that there's still room for growth and there's still this opportunity to make significant change on the way these processes are being laid out. And I think that there's been commitments from the CER, commitments from Canada on how these engagement processes are going to evolve over time. And I think that with that, we can take those evolutions as an opportunity for change. I think with the commitments the CER has made to the UN Declaration and their strategic plan, I think that looking at the 10 principles that the federal government has put in place, that one key thing that I see people constantly talking about is free, prior, and informed consent. And what does that mean? And I think that until we get to a point where regulators acknowledge that and acknowledge that there is processes that we could be looking at, processes that we can be building off of in terms of what free, prior, and informed consent looks like. I think that mechanisms and procedures need to be established to kind of determine how free, prior, and informed consent is sought and redressed if it isn't sought. And what does that mean? And I think when it comes to consent, there's obviously conditions to those types to consent that nations are giving. So that can be accommodation measures, mitigations, those types of things. But right now in the process that we're seeing, and the way the CER does things, there does still need to be change because in terms of compliance, a lot of the compliance isn't necessarily Indigenous focused compliance. So we submit a lot of information to the regulator as nations. We submit culturally sensitive information sometimes on sites of significance, potentially culturally used plants, those types of things. And I think that this type of information could be something that's used to build up what compliance is, because those are the things that we're looking at in terms of mitigations. Those are the things that we're looking at in terms of what we want to protect. So I think that if nations came together and were able to work together on looking at what could conditions be made that are Indigenous based conditions that are co-developed with the regulator, what does compliance look like? That could also be co-developed with the regulator. But I think until we get to that point where Indigenous peoples are involved in that, and obviously to the decision-making process, that we're not there yet, but I think someday, I really hope that we do get there. But yeah, that's just kind of the things I was thinking about in terms of those considerations as a Crown Consultation Coordinator. So thank you.
Thank you to Kyra Northwest from Sampson, and she's been on the committee for quite a while when I was initially there. So thank you all for serving on the committee. I just wanted to just do a little recap, and then those of you in the audience, if you have some questions for the panelists, maybe you can make your way to the mics there and put your question together. But I think the summary is that when we were involved in the beginning, we asked the elders to lead us. Just like tonight, our elder Gilbert Francis led us with the meeting that we're convening, led us with the food and the prayer. And so when we started in the Capel Valley 6-7 years ago, we started with ceremony. So we had a number of pipe holders that attended at FHQ. So I believe we had 7 pipe holders at that time. Maybe Mike will remember the number, but we had about 7 pipe holders. And so we all came together to talk about how are we going to operate? How are we going to have our own health, safety, and environment? And so as we came together with ceremony, with those 7 pipes. That's what led us. We're also led by the elders at that time and our chiefs. So as I said, Chief Todd Pagan at that time was able to recommend me as a co-chair. And so that's how we started. But we started also with the pipes, and we started with the ceremony. The other thing I might mention, and maybe Chief Pagan will talk about it over the next day or so, is that we had buy-in and direction from the leadership at the NEB. So at that time, Peter Watson assembled us in Calgary. We had 109 nations in Calgary 6-7 years ago. Peter Watson was the head of the National Energy Board. He came to tears when it came to discussing how we haven't been able to work with Indigenous people. He came to tears. So it's from that heart that we're sitting here today. We have that vision that was shared by some of our leadership, like Chief Pagan, Peter Watson. And so it's evolved into what we have today. And I just want to echo a little bit of what Mike Sutherland talked about. We have conflicting mandates. If you look at the role of the regulator, we also have conflicting mandates of the fiduciary. So how can you be a fiduciary and how can you be a regulator? So these are important questions that the leadership will have to consider. The committee leadership, the chiefs, the leadership within the CER, leadership within Secretariat and NRCan, and at the ministerial level. So I just wanted to kind of summarize what I saw was two different paradigms, fiduciary and the regulator, and then come to what Richard talked about. We need to define and have a important process that we control. And the key concerns that Kyra talked about, the key concerns of having what one of my brothers termed as indigenous compliance. We need to define what is our indigenous compliance. How are we going to keep these resource developments in compliance with our indigenous teachings, our indigenous principles? So at this time, we'll turn it over to the floor. And if you have some questions, yes. And we'll have questions in the chat. We'll go to the floor. And state your name and the question.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much. I just have to apologize for being a little late here. I had a police commission meeting. I sit on the police commission. Dananastera, Cesar Violet McGinnis. I'm from the Tsuut'ina Nation. I'm the consultation director. And protocols requires that I invite you, that I welcome you. I didn't see any welcoming. You are on Tsuut'ina lands. This is my nation. We're a very proud nation. Normally, I would like one of our council to come and invite you, but we just had elections, so we don't even know who our council reps are yet. But needless to say, we have Chief Whitney Haggajer Whitney is still chief, and we have a number of new councils. So on behalf of the Tsuut'ina Nation, I welcome you to my nation. I hope that you enjoy your time here and contribute to my nation going over there. We need new roads, we need new houses, so enjoy yourselves. But welcome. And I'm really proud, my staff in here and I are here. And I just wanted to start, just do that protocol. So see you, Gus. Thank you.
Thank you. Violet has also been very much involved in our resource analysis and development, and she's helped to provide insight for the Tsuut'ina Nation and leadership. So we thank you for coming. There's two questions that we'll just take a look at. One question, and if anybody would like to answer from the committee, how has the process for major projects changed from and by the regulator and proponents? And the second question is, what processes does the CER use to address bias in regulatory decision-making? I'm looking to John.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Jonathan
yeah,
Timmerland.
happy to go. And thanks for the welcome, Violet, and it's congratulations to Chief Roy Whitney as well for the re-election. And I have on many occasions made contributions to your nation at that other place. So I suspect tables just don't work for me, Violet. I don't know why. So yes, very quickly, thank you for that. The first question is probably a little harder to answer, but I'll just because there's a fair bit to unpack there. But one of the things I will say is in terms of the processes, and I think this is something that that Mike alluded to in his comments, and that is just the importance of making sure that there's an opportunity to inform an environmental impact statement and assessment early, right? That's really critical. So one of the things that we've been trying to do with the CER is to make sure that there's a lot of work that's done well before a project ever comes to the commission to be adjudicated. So, we have a filing manual that has, as I spoke earlier about the requirements we have of regulated industry, and we have a filing manual that sets out pages and pages of requirements that industry must do before they bring an application forward. And that is identifying the nations that could potentially be impacted by the project, engaging them in conversation about, what potentially are the impacts that could occur as a result of the project, mitigation, accommodation that could be necessary. And these all form part of that early record of the conversation with the tribunal as well with our commission. And so it's making sure that we're dealing with those things a lot earlier than bless you, than we had in the past. I think that's really important is you want to, you know, something that can be dealt with early is way better than dealing with it when there's, you know, when there's already construction going on or when a pipeline's in the ground. And just the other piece I would just say as well is we're a bit different from other federal departments in that this, like Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Transport Canada, they make decisions on permits or authorizations based on an activity, whether it's building a bridge or a dam or, you know, cutting into water that potentially could be fish bearing. And then once their decision's made, they make sure the proponent's kind of achieving what it is that they said they would do, but they don't have a full role. We do. We're there. Like our role is from the very start of an application, even before that, with the pre-work I just described, all the way through to when a pipe is abandoned or removed from the ground. So 60, 70 years. So there's a lot of opportunity through our processes and through the work that we do to identify and address concerns throughout the life cycle of a project. And then just quickly on the second one, about bias, and I think it's a great question. And I just would say to that one that I think any organization is the sum of the people that work for it. And Kyra actually quite nicely referenced probably my speaking points that I should have said, but about our strategic plan. So we have a new strategic plan at our organization. It's informed by we'll talk about this later, but it's informed by our board of directors and our Indigenous Advisory Committee and the work that we've been doing with this IMAC and other partners. And as a result, we've identified reconciliation as a main part of the strategic plan. It's a priority. Our act hardwires the requirement to implement the United Nations Declaration and our commitment to doing so. One of the first pieces of legislation in Canada to do that, even before the UN Declaration Act came into force a couple of years ago. So with that, our strategic priority has a couple of key components to it. One is enhancing the involvement of Indigenous people in our work. And we do that at the decision-making level of our organization, but also through our work with nations on the ground, building renewed relationships really based on respect and recognition of rights. But the third piece, and this is kind of the answer to the question, is enhancing the cultural competency of the organization. Big part of addressing bias is actually taking training on unconscious bias. It's on learning about other cultures, recognizing that maybe a Western perspective is not the only perspective that should be brought to bear, and Indigenous knowledge needs to be brought to bear in how we do our decisions. It's also about making sure that the organization, you know, if there's more Indigenous people in the organization. Right now, we have roughly 40 Indigenous people in our organization who self-identified. Organization of around 600 people. That's low. And while we have people at all levels, we most recently hired somebody at a vice president level who's Indigenous. We want to increase that across the organization, so we have Indigenous worldviews and perspectives at the most senior levels of our organization and all throughout. And through that, there's ways of addressing bias as well. But yes, bias has been part of federal decision making for years, and part of addressing that is understanding it, looking to identify ways to address it and mitigate it, bringing other people from different perspectives so you don't just have that echo chamber in the organization, and then committing to continual improvement. And I think that's how we're trying to address bias at the CER. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two more questions there. So what I'd like to do is read them into the record, and then we'd like to get a response, written response, I guess, Jonathan, on the
that's you saying I talk too much. Yeah.
on the question. So the third question that's been asked, and I wanted to read it into the record, is who decides what accommodation measures are appropriate? So we can put together a response for that written and provide that virtually as well for the conference. That would be important. The fourth question that we have is when there are major projects being planned by Canada, whose responsibility is it to ensure there is authentic engagement with First Nations and Métis communities or governments impacted? So these are process questions, and we could probably spend hours doing process questions. So I wanted to open it up, and I think we have a question over here, so I just open it up to the floor.
Hi, my name is Mike Ocon from the Blood Tribe First Nations, part of the IAMC, Alberta First Nations. We represent a lot of people out there. Something that the layperson doesn't know is that only 2% of this line that was created, Enbridge Line 3 replacement project, was actually Crown land. And I've always fought that in that whose land was it before Canada became a country? The First Nations that inhabit these provinces are now dictated on what they can and cannot do. Access is a major problem with all these pipeline projects, transmission line projects, anything that's interprovincial. So we need to change. How much truth and reconciliation have we witnessed? We just had a new premier in Alberta. Where will it go after this? We don't know yet. But these are some of the difficulties that are going on real time. They're going on now. And they will continue to go on for a long time if we don't pull together and make some changes. The advisory committee here is just that. It's an advisory committee. It's not a board. So we provide advice to the government, to CER and NRCan. And is it taken into consideration? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So for myself and where I am, it's been sort of a catch-22. Why did the chicken cross the road? Well, in this case, it's First Nations have always been here, and government and industry don't understand that. We have sites on private land that we cannot look at, we cannot examine them, we cannot document them. And everything seems to work against our favor. So if you have a government that created a policy, a consultation policy hand in hand with industry, how fair is it going to be? So we have children now, grandchildren. How will they deal with this in the future? So we really need to step up and pull together. We have a great deal of numbers here across the country, and we can make change. We just got to get together and brainstorm and work together. That's the main thing, work together to create a better future for our children, grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Mike Oka from the IAMC committee. I also have another question over here. I'd like to go to Chief Cadmus Delorme.
Thank you. Thank you for the prayer, and it's really nice to be here in Treaty 7 territory on Tsuut'ina Nation. I'm Cadmus. I'm Chief of Cowes First Nation. My question is, and then I'm going to say a little bit after, but what is our end goal? Like what like we're going to disagree on how to get there. Like that's human nature. But what is our end goal? You know, in 2016, 2017, I came to a meeting here. Chief Pegan was here. And that's when the 87 or 89, I apologize, I'm off by 2 if I get the number wrong, on what the had to address. And I'm just going to speak very openly, and I don't mean to sound any disrespect, but there's pipelines going through our nations. We're still sitting here. And who is benefiting from these pipelines? Like in 2016, I almost feel like they moved us into this term that Canada defines as consultation, that Canada defines as let's go and talk about Section 35. But ultimately, it's like, let's push the rights holders aside because we got to make sure that the economics in the best interest of this pipeline gets to the end goal. The pipeline's done. Like it's in the ground. It's pumping. It's redone. Like line 3 is, now the decommissioned to remove, and here we are as nations, we're competing against one another. Like, I mean, it's good fairness. I'm not trying to say that, but what is the end goal? Like the end goal should be, from my understanding, that we should be utilizing these moments and these committees and these knowledges that we have to how do we get a percentage? How do we understand, what this natural, 1930 and working with the provinces too. Like right now, we're just focusing on the federal government. The federal government won't intervene on the natural transfer agreement. Like, how do we expand this moment to truly understand what our end goal is here? Because we're going to meet here 2 years from now. And what are we just going to get more updates on what consultation means? I don't mean any disrespect when I say that. I know you're all working really hard. And, Councillor Richard from Cowes, he's always giving us updates. But I hope you understand my question is, what is the end goal? And are we just getting smoke and mirrors here? And do we need to reset our compass to truly understand when we meet in a year from now that we have the right people in the room to understand that as rights holders, we need true impact on what this means to us? So that's my question.
Thank you. This is Mr. Lorme, thank you. So these are important questions that need to guide the committee, need to guide the CER, need to guide the Secretariat, the NRCan, and the work that we're doing within the boards, the work that we're doing within the different provinces. We're all at different levels. We all have different perspectives, as my brother Mike Oka said. We have to understand those and respect those perspectives. And we're all at different wavelengths. We're all at different capacities. So we need to continue this dialogue, continue to get answers for Chief DeLorme's question. And as we go forward, there should be priorities that we address through the committee and through the processes. And I understand your frustration, Chief, because the pipe's already in the ground, everyone's leaving, and yet our communities want, they have challenges, our communities suffer. So that's who we have to think of here. And we have to think of the young ones that aren't even here yet. We have to plan for them. And we have to think of the future. So thank you for your question. Did anybody want to respond from our committee to Chief's question? Mike Sutherland, Peguis First Nation.
I guess one of the things that Chief DeLorme brought to back to my memory here, and when we talk about our end goal, where do we want to go? In 2009, Peguis developed our own consultation policy. In 2013, we updated it, and we handed that policy to the federal government, provincial government, hoping they would take that policy that we drafted into consideration when it comes to consultation and understanding our perspective. But as he says, still yet today, we have nothing, right? And they don't even, all they did is acknowledge the fact that Peguis First Nation has a consultation policy, which is a pretty good policy. And if anybody wants a copy of it, just let me know and I'll send it to you. But we've always taken that initiative to try and meet them head on, but with very little results. And you take a look at the questions that were answered, questions that were asked from the previous, the first question there, accommodation. I have to ask this question, well, what does that mean? Because out of all the Section 35 engagement processes and environmental hearings that we've been through, we haven't received one accommodation measure yet. So what does that tell me about the sincerity of this government, or any government, provincial or federal, and how they want to deal with us? To me, there's not there. That meaningfulness is not there. And we're going to have to fight harder. And I think I agree with our elder Mike Oka that we have to start coming together to take a look at this whole process. There's been a decision made to halt industry, I think up in Blueberry. And I think it's prime time right now that we really look at this decision that was made from that whole region, because we are impacted similarly in our region of Manitoba with extreme extraction of many resources, and we get nothing. So now our elder friends of mine and some of our legalese in our community, we're talking about challenging NRTA. Because what do we have to lose? You know, I talked to chiefs in Manitoba. There's a Western table there where they get together and they start talking about NRTA and challenging that document because there's no great benefits from it. I know Section 13 plans set aside for us to hunt, gather, fish. You know, but what about all the natural resources that are there that we're losing all the time, that we have nothing to gain from it? Yet the impacts, the cumulative impacts from many of those major projects are left with us to deal with, are left to impact us and our water. You know, water is life, but we see the negative impacts of industry. Agriculture is one of the worst in our areas. We've experienced the worst flood in our history, a 200-year flood mark. Never thought we'd ever see that in our lifetime, not mine, but it was here. So we have to really take into consideration NRTA, government policy, legislation, and so on. Because a lot of that stuff is done under the cover of darkness, changes made and amended. I go to many of these hearings within Manitoba, and they're in the night at the legislature where you can voice your concerns. But very seldom I'll see more than 2 or 3 brown faces in that room expressing our concerns in regards to legislation and policy changes. Things have to change, and people in this room, it's up to us to make that change. Because if we don't do it, there's going to be no future for our children as we move on down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We'll be moving now to question 2. I'd like to ask Richard to come. Richard Isakin is going to be asking what are the roles and responsibilities of Enbridge as well as IAMC and impacted nations on now that the decommissioning is complete. And Richard will provide some comments and we'll open it up to the panelists after.
Yep, perfect time to go get a drink. My chief just left the room. Right, perfect timing. All right, thank you. No, those are good comments. I'm just wanted to answer that. So our goal, for me being an elected leader on council and then being on this committee, I separate the roles. I don't bring politics into our task-oriented committee. We do provide advice to government, but not to actually dictate as a rights holder, but to enable perhaps down the road what rights holders can do as far as triggers and actions and more oversight from a rights holder perspective. And some of the recommendations I would give to nations, which I have given to Cowes' First Nations. Cadmus can't verify this, but tell a few little lies. No, is really just revenue sharing,
I mean, the
but it's
time-
also with maybe say
I wish
30% guaranteed.
Kitan and the rest of them.
Mike is on, he's in the restroom.
It's a naked gun.
Awkward. Okay, it's gone. We'll get his opinion wherever he goes. But I just wanted to say that what our end goal is really to, I advised council, what we need to do is provide, revenue sharing, make it a demand from the nation to also have a guaranteed 30% projects so that we can build our capacity so that we can bid into contracts to be the general contractor, and then we'd be also the ones to hire the subcontractors on some of these major projects and include that kind of access to and equity so that nations can build capacity as far as owning a pipeline, operating a potash mine, and doing oil exploration. So some true partnerships in that area. Thank you, Chief, for coming back. It's awesome. But also, I think one of the main things, if I was to give advice to nations as rights holders, is to fill that empty box of Section 35 rights with your Lands Act, with your harvesting policy, which actually will hopefully trickle down to impact benefit agreements. And I know when I suggested it before, so in Saskatchewan, you can do impact benefit agreements. But in other provinces, you can't, because they got conservative governments. We got Saskatchewan, of course, it's a conservative government, but how you interact with the proponent, what you can sign with the proponent, you know, mitigation for emergency response, for when the standards are raised and you want to hold the government to task so that you can monitor the corridor with these new standards. Those kinds of things are what we can do as goals for nations that are rights holders. But I'll go to the question, because I could talk about that other stuff all day long. What are the roles and responsibilities of Enbridge as well as the IAMC and impacted nations now that the decommissioning is complete? And so when the government says, we want this committee to exist for the lifetime of the project. So line 3 has been decommissioned. The new numbered line, which is line 3, is now called line 95. And so it's in operation. It goes from Hardisty to Gretna. So Hardisty, Alberta to Gretna, Manitoba. Then it goes into the States and it's already in operation. And so what one of our ideas was to expand the corridor. And that corridor will help us learn more when you expand the corridor. And we, as the committee, give advice to government to raise standards that you can apply to this larger corridor. An example of that is when a proponent has to address those standards and send out monitors on the line and clean up areas that have exceeded the corridor, which the standards have dictated has to be addressed. And so we can send out Indigenous monitors along the line for historical incidences, spills and whatnot, and we can have eyes on. And part of it is, now that decommissioning is over, is to stop operating in silos like Mike Oka and Mike Sutherland have said. It's we too operate in silos as rights holder nations. We need to get together, like for example, Treaty 4. I know we have Lynn Akus here. I don't want to, she's probably getting some good ideas. And but as Treaty 4 chiefs, we need to assert what we want to have happen in Treaty 4, because Cowes First Nation says that anything that happens in Treaty 4 we want to know about. And so if we raise those standards, we put to task not just the CER, but other agencies of government like NRCan, Environment, Transport Canada, Heritage Resources. And so that's why you send out monitors on the line. When we narrow down those standards that help Indigenous nations protect our cultural heritage, you send out your Indigenous monitors on this expanded scope of the line. They can monitor, they can identify, perhaps there's some chance fines. We report those. And if we don't have the legislation behind us to protect those heritage resources and those chance fines, what we're doing is developing a protocol to work with the CER to actually start those baby steps into influencing not only the advice to government that's going to eventually come out of the committee, but to influence the legislation and the regulatory body to influence the proponents to protect those resources in partnership with impacted nations. And so what are the roles and responsibilities of Enbridge as well as the IAMC and the impacted nations? It's still to collaborate and move forward. So the pipeline is built, was done within the first 5 years. I think October 22nd of this year, this fall, it was officially decommissioned, the pipeline. So what do we do moving forward? Previously it was economic access. It was economic benefit. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a $7 billion plus project. 10% of that can go a long way in many of our communities. But moving forward, the big takeaway isn't going to be monetary. It's going to be those cultural protections from Heritage Canada. It's going to be those environmental protections from Environment Canada. It's going to be those dollars that Natural Resources Canada doles out for the smart renewable electrification program. So you can build your solar panels and your wind farms. And then you can also responsibly build major projects and perhaps own pipelines and potash mines and so forth, and other open pit mines, perhaps in BC and all that kind of stuff. So we can really influence the way the government develops its relationships, but solidifies those relationships formally through legislation, through regulation, and through even policy. And the CER, they have influence over their own regulations. They can actually do that. So when we give advice to government, if they can make those changes without having to go to the legislative body, that's preferable and that's ideal. And part of that is communicating that to the nations. And then, of course, celebrating some of the advice to government that is happening with some of these committees. Some of the folks, all these folks, Mike Sutherland, Marcy, and Kyra have been on this committee since the start. And so we're learning, we're evolving. And what can we do? We can send more people to this committee so we can learn the language of major projects, learn the language of the proponents, build those relationships, use what we learn and send that advice on. And a lot of that advice that comes around takes time, takes a few years. In our minds, when we send advice, we're waiting by the phone, a week later. But realistically, the bureaucracies and those agencies that have been developed since treaty, they've had 100 years to develop. Of course, you've heard from John Timlin that some of these agencies evolve over time as well. And so that would be our job. Once decommissioning has happened, our job is to learn through the lifetime of this project what we know will help influence the future. And hopefully, like Mike Sutherland said, protect the environment, protect our children, and protect the future, because we all are feeling climate change, and this might be where it's at. And so I just want to end with that and leave it to John Snow to moderate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So at this time, I'll ask another committee member to respond to the question. The question we're looking at is, what are the roles and responsibilities of Enbridge as well as the IAMC and impacted nations now that the decommissioning is complete? And we'll hear from Marcy Riel from Manitoba.
Can you guys hear me if I stay here? Oh, perfect. Oh, no. Is it working? Okay. So what I would suggest is in terms of responsibilities on the part of Enbridge, and frankly, I'm going to tie the CER into this. I think the process moving forward is about Enbridge setting the standard for industry. The IAMCs, the process that we have in place, the work that this committee has done to create a relationship with the proponent needs to be the bare minimum for what every other proponent needs to do. And I would suggest that, of course, now the question is gone. I would suggest that the same needs to hold true for the CER, right? There's an opportunity here for the regulator to be an example by which other regulators set their standards. And while certainly there are other, you've got the agency, you've got the CNSC, you've got all of the other federal departments that are doing work in this area, there's a chance here for the work of this committee in bringing together the nations, the regulator, and Canada. There's an opportunity here to set that stage so that on a go-forward basis, the nations can be reassured that proponents will act in a certain way and that the regulator will make them do so. I'm mindful of Mike, often saying there's a responsibility to hold the feet to the fire. And it would seem to me that moving forward in a process that evolves as this one has, the regulator has that responsibility to ensure that the proponent has done what it committed to doing when it consulted with or when it engaged with the nations. The whole issue of Crown consultation, I think to the point that Mike was making, and obviously your comment as well, becomes that gray area around it's the duty to consult and accommodate, not the duty to consult. And so, certainly my concern as it relates to that and as it relates to what do we do on a go forward becomes this whole issue of whose responsibility is it to follow up on accommodation that has been put forward. And I know, Mike, you had, made the comment about accommodation and just commitments that may have been made by the proponent or commitments that have been made by Canada. Certainly, I would suggest that the problem that I see with the CER being the Crown consultation coordinator is there's no mechanism by which those accommodation measures can be followed through on. The regulator has a responsibility to make sure the proponent does something. It doesn't have a responsibility to make sure that Canada does something. And so I think that is still an item that is left outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcy from Manitoba Métis. We have another comment. Yes, Jonathan Timlin from the CER. Go ahead. Yeah.
Does this work? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
It does.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, no, again, I've worked with Marcy for years and I really appreciate the perspectives that she brings in. It's helping me be a better person at the CER and for the CER be a better regulator. I'd maybe just add a couple of things. One is, unlike some of the other regulators out there, we have that life cycle responsibility, right? So there's that ability to address issues outside of the hearing process, like during construction or operation or decommissioning, which adds, other opportunities to address impacts and concerns. As the agent of the Crown, if the CER approves a project, and we only approve projects at a certain threshold, the project has to go to a higher level of decision making. So if it's longer than 40 kilometers, it goes to cabinet to make a decision. We make the recommendation. The commission makes the recommendation. They would also recommend the accommodation measures that need to be a part of that. And then cabinet makes the ultimate decision. But then our responsibility doesn't end there. Our responsibility is to hold those, hold the proponents' feet to the fire, so to speak, in the sense of making sure that they adhere to the commitments that they've made in the hearing process, but also that they're adhering to, our regulatory framework, any standards or other things that apply. I'm just staring right down the lens of that massive camera. Sorry, Christy. And then also, the other aspects being, the accommodations that were set out during the hearing. So there is opportunity. There's always opportunity for nations, if they feel that proponents not meeting a condition, to come back to the CER. We have informal processes where we have conflict resolution, and we have people trained in that work with impacted nations. Sometimes it's nations, sometimes it's farmers, sometimes it's other land users who have concerns about how a proponent's done something, and then they work to potentially resolve it. If it's not resolved, it can go to adjudication. It can be resolved at the commission level, which has legal force and requirements that can be brought to bear. So that's important as well. There's one other absolutely astonishingly brilliant point I wanted to make, which totally has left my head. So I'll just acknowledge Richard's wonderful outfit, and as my you look more cowboy than I do, and I'm from Calgary.
Thank you, Jonathan
Thanks.
Timlin. We'll go to either Mike, or Kyra after. Thank you. And Mike will,
I reckon go.
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
Right.
and, okay,
Turn this on. It's on? Okay. I want to speak a little bit about that question.
Yeah.
Especially the part of not only the IMC's responsibility, but also the CR's responsibility. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Barb Hobson, and I'm from Swan Lake First Nation, Treaty 1 territory, and I'm also my IAMC member. So I want to tell you a little bit about my community. I think a lot of the IMC members know about it already. The Line 3, well, actually all the pipes flow right from Hardisty, Alberta, and they flow through Alberta, they flow all through Saskatchewan, and they flow through Manitoba right up to Gretna. That's just by the border. The pipeline flows by a lot of communities that are impacted by the pipeline. But Swan Lake First Nation is the only community where the pipe actually flow right in our community. So, and that happened in, I think, the 1947, the King signed the first permit that the first 3 pipes, I believe, or 2 pipes that came through. And then in 1950, they actually put the pipes through, and our community had no say about it. It just happened. So, and then I can't remember the year, but it's they put in the other lines as well. And of course, then again, our community had no say in it, and we weren't, what was the word I'm looking for? Consulted, thank you. And then again, they came in 2008 and 2009, where Enbridge put in the Alberta Clipper and the Southern Lights. And I think that would be around the first time out of all those years that Swan Lake was finally consulted or was allowed to be. We actually got to sit at the table. So, and then again, just recently, because our agreement with Enbridge ended, we get to be back at the table. But like every other community when they were building pipes or they're laying them, there was work being done. The communities were involved. That's later. Communities were involved, but once the work was done, the proponent was gone and the communities didn't have anything. They were just, that was it for them. And the same thing had happened to us, even though the pipeline comes right through directly into our community. And the pipeline is just a couple of miles from our water aquifer. So if there's ever a spill there, we would be directly impacted. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think it was Chief DeLorme that said that that everybody's fighting for the piece of the pie. You know, when I think about, Mike has brought this up so many times at other meetings that there's 26 First Nations that are impacted in Manitoba. I'm not sure how many are in Saskatchewan. And then you have how many in Alberta. And I think about all those communities. Well, I look around the tables now and I've seen some people, I'm seeing some people here for the very first time. And that's good to see. But we talk about the communities that don't have the capacity, that are just getting left behind. So, you know, when we're talking about the piece of the pie, nobody wants to, everybody's scared they're going to lose out on their piece of the pie. Because and I think about these communities that not even aware that this event is going on. They're not even aware that the pipeline is impacting their community. So the reason I bring this up is I think it's our responsibility to reach out to more communities that don't have the capacity to be here. Because this room, if we had all the impacted nations here, we would never have been able to put them all into this room. We would have needed a huge auditorium to get everybody in here. So, but it was good to see everybody, and I want us to make more of an effort to include those nations that can't be here and that can't speak for themselves. So if they're not speaking for themselves, they're not also speaking for their children, their grandchildren. So that's it.
Thank you, Barb. Barb's also on the IAMC committee. So I think what I'm hearing as well from Barb is that we need to have not only our strategic plan involvement with the board and the chiefs and others, but I think we have to go back to the community and get that plan validated. So the validation of those plans is going to be critical. So one of the things that impacts the nations that I've worked with, Barb, was the emergency response plan. So you identified that. When there's an incident, what is going to be the response? And who's going to respond? And how will they respond? So I'll give you an example. One in our area, in the Treaty 7 area, one of our nations had a tabletop. So we're required to run an emergency response plan, incident, and scenario. One of the areas was saying, well, who's responding first? And so there's a number of small towns around here. So they said the first responder is Cochrane, town of Cochrane, Alberta. And then they said, okay, well, what if Cochrane has to respond to a multiple emergency event? Who's the second responder? And they said the second responder is Canmore. So if it's not Cochrane, it'll be Canmore that responds. And so if those two are both tied up, the town of Cochrane, the town of Canmore, who responds next? They said, oh, the city of Cranbrook would be on their way. Cranbrook in southern British Columbia. So we said that can't happen and we have to change. So what I'm saying is look at the response and then have your input. Who's going to respond and what's going to happen, especially if it affects your water and your aquifer and the importance to your community. And we have also remarks from Richard Asakin.
Testing. All right. I just wanted to point out that, thank you, Barb, for those comments. And thank you, John Snow, for those comments on emergency management. I think the Auditor General just submitted a report and evaluation, and they were very harsh on Government of Canada. It's report number 8, and it was released in October and presented to Cabinet, I believe, fairly soon. But they're doing really poorly at giving money for capacity for emergency response to First Nations. And so that's some of the rights holders can do is press that government to actually intervene and provide clearer avenues for capacity building in emergency response. And one of the things that they had a problem with at that evaluation is that pipeline emergency response, First Nations cannot apply for money to build capacity for a pipeline emergency response because of the definitions. So one of the advice to government would be to say, please include a definition of pipeline emergency response so First Nations can access money to build their capacity to respond to incidents along the line. And so those one of the things that we can do as a committee. One of those things you guys can do as rights holders, as COWSs can do, perhaps through Treaty 4 chiefs or perhaps through the FSIN or through AFN, is to hold the government to task, help build our capacity, widen those avenues of access to funding, change those definitions so we have greater access. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And we'll also have comments from Mike.
Yeah, I guess on that same lines, what Richard's talking about, I've been harping on this since I think our second year in the IMAC, when Enbridge took us to Edmonton to take a look at their terminal over there. And we started talking about emergency response over there. And I keep saying the same thing over and over again. Emergency response for who? It's certainly not us, because, well, in Manitoba, we have very few emergency response personnel in our communities. In my community, which is 3 hours north, we have a fire hall, we have an ambulance dispatch, we have about 15 emergency response staff with 2 or 3 ambulances. We have a 20-man fire department with 2 or 3 fire trucks. So we have the capacity, but we're 3 hours from the line. So I keep asking Enbridge and I keep asking the CER and Arcan, who are we developing this for? Because if we don't develop it for our First Nations communities, we're always going to be outside that yellow tape watching, just like the Husky spill I've learned so much about, right? And we'll never be a part of the cleanup, never be a part of the mitigation measures. But this is a big picture thing because Enbridge says, well, that's not our responsibility to develop that capacity. Well, then who is? Whose responsibility is that? And as an IMEC member here, I think that responsibility lies with us as well to keep putting the pressure on the parties that be, whether it be NRCan, the CER, and Enbridge, and also Indigenous Services Canada I brought into the fray as well, because again, you're building capacity within our First Nation communities. But if there's a spill in Swan Lake or an emergency there, guess what? Even though it's in Swan Lake's community, they're going to be locked out of that emergency. They're not going to be a part of that process because they don't have the capacity to be a part of the mitigation, the emergency response, and so on. So this all has to change. Now that the decommissioning is finished, we have to start looking at the big picture issues within our community so that the Husky spill that happens in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, we're not sitting on the outside of the yellow tape watching what's happening and wondering and asking questions, because to us, that's not acceptable. And I guess when you take a look at, you know, other issues along there, I always bring up conditions 21 and 29, long-term monitoring, long-term mitigation. And it brings me back to the very first summer I was a part of IMAC. We were it wasn't even no IMAC yet. We were drafting the terms of reference and we were talking about monitoring, and I was really excited because I thought, you know, here's the pie and there's 3 components, Enbridge and the CER and First Nations, right, or Aboriginal, until the very last day when we were finished. And then the member of the NRCan staff said, sorry, Mike, but there's no legislation giving you guys the authority to be monitors on the line, right? And I was so mad, like I was spitting fireballs, and I wouldn't let the secretariat out of the room from 5 o'clock till 11. I sat there and I fought to try and get that changed. And they said, you can't, it's legislation, you can't change it, it's policy. And man, was I ever pissed. after going through those 3 months of preparing those terms of reference, thinking that we could have our own monitoring program on the line, to be told after, well, it's not in the legislation, Mike. You know, that's pretty underhanded to do that, to have us at the table and say, we got to develop these terms of reference to get you guys on the line. But now that it's done, said and done, that's fine, you know, and I'm still thankful to be a part of this project because I'm in the room, right? Working to initiate change. But condition 21 and 29 is still top priority for me. You know, I was told through Barb and others, and then even Enbridge, that in Manitoba every year is about 150 integrity digs. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, might be more. So why don't we have our own companies doing the integrity digs? Why do we have to work for a white company to look after our own backyards? This is where things have to change. We're not stupid. We're very intelligent people. We've been on this earth for generations. Why can't we develop our own integrity companies, dig companies, and at least take 1/3 of those integrity digs in Manitoba? The Métis get the other 1/3, and then it could go out to the companies, just to be fair. This is where we need to go after decommissioning is done. You know, we can't keep getting the little, you know, inspection jobs where we send our monitors there to watch an integrity dig. We should be the ones doing the integrity dig. We got to get away from this colonialistic way of thinking and start putting Enbridge and anybody's feet to the fire to make sure that we have equal and fair opportunity in this country. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. We have 2 questions over here. We had 2 questions that were, yes, go ahead. Thank you. I could say your name and your question. Thank you.
Miigwech. Minnow Tipikat. My name is Lynn Akus. I'm from Zagame Anishinaabe in Treaty 4 territory. I want to thank Elder Gilbert for the opening prayer, and I want to thank Tsuut'ina Nation for hosting us. And I acknowledge Treaty 7 and our local, the Métis locals here. I don't have I have a lot of questions, but mainly I just have some things to say about these processes, and just carrying on, adding to what Chief Cadmus Delorme had talked about earlier about the NRTA. Specifically, where are we going from here? And I think that and I want to say thank you to IAMC for doing all of this work. And I think there's a strong role, I think, for the IAMC to have a monitoring role for whatever they're calling the new line. I don't attend these meetings anymore, because we've, you know, in the past, we have filed for intervenor status on projects when it was previously the NEB. One of our counselors usually, you know, takes the lead on consultation for Zagame Anishinaabe. And she asked the question at one of these meetings, has NIB or CER, have they ever refused the project? Has there ever been a refusal of a project? And the answer was no. And so for us, taking part in these processes is futile and a waste of our time. But I do want to say to everyone here that, well, I guess I do have a question for anybody involved in any of the federal agencies. Has the government of Canada begun to prepare its agencies to comply with UNDRIP? We're using, Kyra mentioned FPIC, free, prior and informed consent. We're using outdated language, and we need to start, you know, turning our minds towards free, prior and informed consent, and we need to prepare ourselves for being able to uphold Canada to these standards that they've set for themselves. those aren't our standards. Those are Canada's minimum standards that they've set for themselves. I don't, UNDRIP is not going to fulfill our Section 35 rights. It's not going to fill that box. Only our people can fill that box by following our laws, by continuing to revitalize our language, by exerting our right, our inherent rights on the land, and holding on to our knowledge. That's what's going to fill up our rights, right? I don't think Section 35 is the answer either. I think that a sovereign approach is the way forward. But we have a relationship with the Crown, and I think we need to hold Canada to account for all of these regulatory processes, any amendments to regulation or law. We have to hold Canada account to maintain their minimum standards. And this process obviously is not maintaining any minimum standards, certainly not ours. So I wish you all a good evening. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief. I think as you speak, I was thinking about the work that Blueberry has done. And Blueberry has looked at a cumulative effects impact assessments, and they've enforced that. And so now they're, as you said, they're calling Canada to account. So it seems that sometimes unless we go to court, we're not going to get any kind of response. So that's unfortunate, but I think Mike's call and Richard's call that we need to work together, as well as Elder Mike Oka. We need to start sharing some of our notes, especially if we're going to go to court, and we should go to court together. So we also had another question. Yes.
Ambawaste,
Mboshte.
EMA to the elder for the prayer and to Tsuut'ina Nation for hosting this event and IMC for the invite. I guess I have a few questions for IMC. I'm Stoney Nakota. I come from Mosquito Grizzly Bear Head Lean First Nation, and my nation is still in litigation with Husky over the oil spill that happened in North Saskatchewan River. And it's been taking how many years to, bring Husky to the table to settle. It's like the other lady said, everybody's looking for their piece of pie. And, the way I see it, our nation's never really settled because we don't really see it as our piece of pie because it's our traditional inherent right to these natural resources. My father was a World War II veteran, and that's one of the things that he always said is every First Nation should be a multimillionaire out of all the resources that Canada and other companies pull out of this land. So with IMC and in our area here, there's a lot of SAGD development, and if you don't know what SAGDs are, they're steam assisted gravity distribution plants. I'm a power engineer by trade, and I've worked in the oil and gas industry for a number of years, and I've worked for Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology for a decade. When Enbridge Line 3, before it was started, I had the opportunity to meet Bill Crow, if you guys know him. And Bill Crow was an Indigenous liaison for Husky, and he came to my office in North Balford, and he said, "Grant, how can we work together?" So I told him I went to school at SAIT here in Calgary, and I took my power engineering here. And that in one of the modules in our power engineering modules is a pipeline 101 course. And I said, why don't you teach that so you can engage and give First Nation memberships the opportunity to work on Line 3. The other part is Inotech at the same time introduced a pipeline monitoring program here in Calgary, and I sent 13 of my clients from SIT to take this. And like Mike, I think he's out of the room here, said after the clients took the monitoring program, they weren't given the opportunity to work as monitors on Line 3. And Inotech was, very helpful. They gave the clients a place, a dorm to live at SAIT, and and he gave them a living allowance, and I commend that company. And the other part of it is, you know, Cenovus, well, Cenovus bought Husky in our area, and Serafina, they've been building all these SAGDs, and if you know what SAGDs are, you know, they inject steam into the ground to make the oil a lighter viscosity, so they can pump it to surface. So once all these oil reservoirs are depleted, and you know what materials are they're pumping back in, you know, more or less it's, you know, like fracking. And like you were talking about aquifers, and our water tables are being affected, most definitely. So does IMC see itself as a role as our own First Nation energy regulator, working side with the CER? And do they are they given any information from Canada energy regulators from all these major projects, and like the other ladies talked about spills and integrity digs, and you know, working at SIT gave me the opportunity to work in our power engineering department, but also all the tradespeople that we have as First Nations that work in oil and gas. A lot of our people put up these pipelines. A lot of our people build these SAGD plants, oil and gas refinery. My brother still works for Cenovus. He's been there for 34 years as a first class power engineer. And, you know, we really need to bring that capacity building already has been started. And I really feel that there needs to be a place for all these tradespeople that it's like Mike said, our people aren't dumb. We just got to get them together and to support the committees like IMC. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to respond to the question?
Go ahead, Marcy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I ran to the washroom and I was afraid of that moment, you know, so I unplugged and.
Okay,
actually-
John, okay, John.
I know, sorry.
Too much.
Too much. I actually was funny. You don't want to eavesdrop in a washroom, but while I was in there, this person said, "My gosh, this session's going really, really late." And then the person was like, "Oh, but I'm from Winnipeg," you know, so it was like 2 hours later their time. I thought that was funny. So in that vein, I'll try to keep it not too much longer for me. But I just wanted to address a couple of questions, and I thought the questions were excellent. And first of all, to the colleague from Treaty 4, and just to say that, yeah, it's true that it's quite rare that projects are not approved by the CER. And I can't think of too many in the history of the CER. There was the Sumas electrical line that went to the island, Vancouver Island, that wasn't approved. Big Northern Gateway project wasn't approved a few years back. So it's relatively rare, and that's not to say that the hearing process doesn't matter, and it really does, because it's through the hearing process that a project that comes in very, very early is improved substantially through the process by hearing about the concerns that impacted nations, by landowners, by others, but particularly the rights holders like the nations have. It's through the hearing process that projects get better. And the project that exits the hearing process is very different from what came in. So I wouldn't want to give the impression that the work that everyone here is doing and the work that my colleagues in the IMAC have been doing isn't valuable, because it is about making things better and improving projects and introducing those accommodations and following up on those measures. So I just want to say that. And the other point, just with respect to you know, like additional, you know, I really agreed with, I always tend to agree with, it makes my life easier when I agree with what Mike had to say. So, you know, just in the sense that it's important, it is important that there's greater involvement of Indigenous businesses in pipeline construction and activity. Absolutely. I think even just at the CER, like one of the things we're trying to do with the CER now is actually introduce an Indigenous procurement strategy, where we want to make sure that there's a minimum amount of Indigenous procurement, or of our overall procurement that we're doing, you know, with Indigenous businesses. And so, I mean, these are all important things. Of course, there's a number of measures that we're looking at about that, like how do you identify, I mean, there's a definition of an Indigenous owned business, but there's always, challenges around that as well. But these are really important things. And I think, as we continue to Chief Cadmus talked about where are we going? What's our end goal? And our end goal is the implementation of the United Nations Declaration. That's the North Star for us. That's where we want to go. We're not there yet. Yeah, we've got to deal with issues around free, prior, and informed consent. And yeah, Article 18, where it talks about Indigenous involvement in decision making. All of these things are steps that we need to continue to achieve, right? But it's only through these kind of dialogues where we're actually able to sit down and get to know each other, have a meal together, participate in ceremony together, that we're able to actually build the relationships that help us get to that point. One of the big next steps is around, this is going to sound like a funny Ottawa term, but the Indigenous Ministerial Arrangements Regulations, which is essentially a regulatory making authority that's in the Act, in the CER Act, that allows government to identify decisions under the CER Act that Indigenous governing bodies can make. And that provides great potential for the tangible, alive of Article 18, right? When you think about the direct decision making, we're committed to doing this. We just got to work together to do it. And so I just wanted to maybe make those points and just say I think it's just really important to identify that it is through this kind of dialogue that we're able to make progress. And yeah, we're building on a number of years where things weren't always great, and we all know that. And I'm humble enough to know that in my lifetime that's been the case as well. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point around relationship building and just the potential that exists through so many other things, but ultimately to achieve what we all want to do, which is the full implementation of the UN Declaration. Thanks, John.
Thank you. So we'll be moving on to our next clip, and we have another question over here. So I'm going to go to the floor again. Thank you. Your name and your question. Thank you.
Sure. Bonjour, Degani Magnetuk. Anyway, Mark Dames to Tim, My name is Michael Esquash Sr. I'm a counselor of Swan Lake First Nation. We deal with Enbridge, and we've just recently dealt with CER. And it frustrates me because I think, and I listen to CER and I listen to all these regulatory bodies or whatever they're called. And it frustrates me because our people need to create our own regulatory body. We shouldn't have to be sanctioned or governed or approved by the government to be regulators. Like we're not, like you said, Mike, we're not stupid. And like my friend said over there, there's many of us people that are trained with degrees and have all the knowledge necessary and the skills. The problem is we as First Nations don't know how to play together. We need to start working together, like really banding together here and make our own regulatory body, First Nations regulators. And we need to say what we want to see happen. We don't need approval from the CER. The CER still works for the government. They keep talking about relationships. It's been 500 years. You should know us by now, and yet it's still going on and on and on. It's just frustrating, seeing this. We deal with Enbridge all the time. And yeah, they bring their trinkets and their few bucks and try to kiss our ass, excuse my language. To say, sorry, I put a bunch of pipelines through your reserve. And I keep telling the Enbridge guy, well, my auntie lives 50 yards from that pipeline, all those pipelines. My uncle's right there too. So if you spill, and it actually goes over our aquifer. There's 2 aquifers it goes over. We asked the CER to come out just recently, last week, right? November 17th, they came out. It didn't do nothing for us. Like I could understand, and it's amazing to hear that CER has never refused a project. So who do you regulate for? The government. Like you said, if you can't decide, you take it up to cabinet and give your recommendation, right? So it's still the government deciding. It's not, it doesn't matter what we say. And I just don't get that. I don't understand why we ain't creating this regulatory body ourselves. We have the knowledge, we have the know-how. What are we waiting for as First Nations, as Indigenous people? You know, we have knowledge keepers, we have people that are trained, doctors and, you know, people with masters and all these different sciences and everything we need. We have that all across Mikanaka, okay, Turtle Island here, Canada. But we're not putting them together here. I don't understand why we're not doing that yet. And we're always so busy trying to please the government for them to approve what we do or say, or hopefully they listen to us. We're not even listening to each other. We have to do that. I don't know. It's not rocket science, I don't think. I think we see this. You know, our elders always tell us, listen to each other, help each other, unite, be strong together. But we're not doing that. You know, we want to see results. We have to make them happen. But you actually have to get off your butt and do it, right? You can't just keep talking, because we keep talking. Enbridge came on our land and I told them I'm tired of talking to them. They need to really do something. You know, after a while, it's just words that don't mean nothing. We need to do something. All our nations are impacted by everything that goes on here, whether it's pipelines, gas pipelines, hydro, whatever, dams, water, all that stuff. Everything affects us. And this whole damn country is ours. It affects all of us. Every day of our lives. You know, and our people are still getting sick. Our people are still suffering. They're still the poorest in this country. We're still third world here. And we're waiting for the government to have a better relationship with us. They never intended to do that. They just wanted the land and the resources, and they got it. And now they're playing this game with us. We need to be smarter, and we need to make something that's real, that can actually do something. You know, we need to band together to say, no, this is not going to happen. You're not putting that pipeline there. Take it out of the ground and move it away from here. Actually move it out of our territory. We're all affected. It's tough. So yeah, I understand the frustration too. Yeah, sometimes it's just words. I don't like words. I just want action.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing. It has to start with ourselves. How are we going to move forward? How are we going to do the work together? And as I said to Chief Akos, I think unless we go to court, people are not going to listen to us. So maybe we need to begin banding together on what we're going to do to protect our lands and our people. And part of it is getting the training and the background that we heard about from Mosquito. I worked with Dr. Shauna Lee Chai on that program from Innotech. So training our people, not just in the academic, but also in the traditional. That's what Mike was saying. And so I think he wants to say something else about that. We need both the Western training and the traditional training. And Mike will say a few words.
Well, it's not about that, but you know, we heard the comments about UNDRIP. So you know, Canada's put the engagement process out there last year, for, and funding available for First Nations to, access funding to engage your communities on UNDRIP. So I said, well, sure, we'll play the game, and one of my staff, we applied for the funding and we got to do our community, we got our $100,000. But, as I've been traveling throughout the community within the city of Winnipeg and Peguis and Selkirk, where all our people live, and I've been talking to people about, like we're going to be doing the UNDRIP thing, the engagement process. Probably 80 to 90% of them say, well, what's that? What does that mean? What's UNDRIP? Right? And so it really begs the question, maybe we need more than just this 1 or 2 or 3 sessions on UNDRIP. But I also want to raise the issue with Canada, because we met with the ADM the other day out of Ottawa, the Deputy Minister of Justice. And we had a lot to talk about, but as the meeting was done, I was thinking, why are we educating our own people about UNDRIP? How come we're not educating the rest of Canada about UNDRIP and what it really means and stands for? And these are the things that we have to look at, because to me, it makes me feel like I'm not all that smart, and that other people are inferior, and that we have to come together to educate our own selves. But are we educating the right population? That's a question I have when it comes to UNDRIP, because whether or not be UNDRIP or TRC or the treaties, is Canada really following any of these documents? To me, they're not. I don't see any benefits from any of them, even our treaties. I know in Treaty 1, our elders talk about the depth of a plow. That's all we gave up. And Mike talks about private land and we can't access that. Well, if they understand what the depth of a plow means, maybe we should be educating the rest of Canada and all its departments about the treaties, about UNDRIP and TRC before we start educating ourselves. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the last question at this time. I want to call up Marcy for answering question 3, and she's going to provide some comments. And the question we're going to take a look at is, what do the IAC, IAMC do, and how does the relationship work to advance engagement and relationship building? Marcy. Okay.
We invite you to take a few minutes as Marcy Riel of the Manitoba Métis Federation shares perspectives on the IAC. Marcy is the Senior Director of the Energy and Infrastructure Department of the Manitoba Métis Federation, or MMF, the Indigenous Co-Chair of the Line 3 IAMC, and a Métis Nation member of the IAC.
The IAC was created to provide advice to the board, not, and I suppose to the CER at large, but really, where does that trickle down to the benefit of the nations? It doesn't. It's not intended to, right? Because there isn't that. I mean, I suppose it's possible that, the IAC would provide kind of recommendation around, regulatory processes that would be to the benefit of Indigenous nations. But to the extent possible, the IAMC has a better opportunity to be there and frankly has better leverage to make that happen. I had made a comment the other day because somebody asked me if I thought the IAC was like the big brother of the IAMC. And my perspective is that they're like, friends, but not family. Because to my mind, they have some similar roles. But the terms of reference for the IAMC is specifically tying the nations into a process that involves Canada and the regulator. And the IAC just ties those 9 people into the board.
Can you all hear me okay? Perfect. So for reference, I'm the Red River Métis representative on the IAMC and on the IAC, which I assume is the reason we were asking Marcy what she thinks. Nobody discussed how big the picture of Marcy was going to be, though. I feel that was left out. But, shout out to Chief Pegan because he also is on both the IAMC and the IAC. So as you heard in the clip, from my perspective, the IAC and the IAMC have similar roles. They're similar, but they're not the same. They were both triggered by decisions made by Canada, one through the licensing conditions related to Line 3 and to TMX, and one through the CER Act to create an IAC. To my mind, the two committees are connected, obviously, but their mandates are fundamentally different. And I'll just read the mandate really quickly so that you have a sense of where I'm going here. So with respect to the IAMC, the committee will form the basis of an enhanced relationship between the Indigenous nations, the government, and the regulator with respect to Line 3 activities. So just Line 3. The mandate of the IAC, being the CER's IAC, is to advise the board on how the CER can build a renewed relationship with First Nations, the Métis Nation, and the Inuit. And so I guess what I'm trying to raise is this issue of the IAMC has a role and a responsibility, and the IAC has a role and a responsibility. But the opportunity for the nations to meaningfully participate in the larger process is found within the IAMC. And that's not to say that there's something wrong with the IAC that's formed, just that the intention behind it is not the same. As everyone in the room is or should be aware, the Line 3 IAMC was the first of its kind. It brought together the nations, Canada, the regulator. Let's not kid ourselves, it's like not perfect. As Mike and others have said, it wasn't always nice, and it certainly wasn't always easy, but it's important work. My perspective is that the IAMC was intended to provide an opportunity for Indigenous nations to meaningfully participate in the process, to have a seat at the table, and to have a mechanism by which change can and should happen. The IAC is intended to provide meaningful change at and within the CER. Yes, that will inevitably lead to change for Indigenous nations, but the role and the responsibility of the IAC members is different. So if you think of the IAMC and their roles and responsibilities of the committee members versus the roles and responsibilities of the committee members on the CER's IAC, and to be fair, the same holds true for the other regulators. They all have IACs, and the terms of reference for those IACs is very similar. The point I'm trying to make is that the opportunity for the committee members to drive change is not the same when you're talking about the IAMC as it is with the IAC. And I would suggest that it's not that it's a negative scenario, it's just that there's not that opportunity there. So one of the things I had raised was I think there's an issue in the application of the concept of Indigenous advisory committees, whether that's the IMCs, the IAC, the IACs from other regulators. The nations have been pushing for meaningful participation in processes that are impacting their rights, claims, and interests. By participation, I mean on the ground in the moment. Indigenous monitoring, advice to government, advice to the regulator, emergency management, not observing the process, but driving it. Here, though, is the issue. While Line 3 IAMC is intended to address issues that nations have brought forward specific to Line 3, the IAC isn't even allowed to do that. There's no avenue for nations to bring issues forward to the IAC, like the CER's IAC. I think the perspective on the part of the nations is that there should be. We've seen a number of scenarios where nations have brought forward issues to the chair or the co-chair of the IAC with the intention of seeking perhaps an alignment of interest, right? I, as a nation, am concerned about this particular project. What can the CER's IAC do about it? The reality is the CER's IAC isn't even allowed to talk about it. And I think that's a fundamental difference. The IAMC is there to have those conversations, to provide a place to talk about it, to do something about it. Maybe it's not perfect, right? We talked about that, but at least there's an opportunity. There's a gap with the regulators' IACs, and to the extent that it's not just the CER, I will admit that. I think there's a gap in all of the IACs. Before I turn this over to my fellow panel members, I'd like to raise the issue of whether the IAMCs and the IAC can help advance engagement. I think that the IAMC can. I'm not sure that the IAC can, particularly in light of its mandate. Frankly, I would suggest that engagement, by definition, is that coordination of a relationship. It might be an adversarial relationship, but it's still a relationship. And the IAC is not designed to even allow for that. From the perspective of relationship building, if by relationship you mean the one being built between the nations, the regulator, and the Crown, then yes, I think the IAMC is key to doing that. What that leaves the IAC, I'm not sure. I think there's an opportunity for both to be better than what they currently are. And that's from me, a person that's been here from like, I don't know, 100 years ago, it seems, who was at the table during co-development, who reviewed and participated in the terms of reference, who was part of the first term, who was the Indigenous co-chair of the second term, who is still here in the third term, like many of those folks sitting right here. In fact, all of the folks sitting right here. There is a gap that can only be filled by the perspective of the nations. And I would suggest that without the nations providing recommendations to Canada on how to address those gaps, that gap will continue. I will note, I'm also a person who, like all of my fellow committee members, participates in these processes in addition to our regular jobs. I would suggest that the irony of this process, and this is where somebody really should have got me some dinner before we sat me down here because I'm a little grumpy. But the irony of this process is that those who are supposed to be advising, those that we are supposed to be advising are being paid to listen to us. We, on the other hand, are providing our perspective, we're sharing our knowledge, we're sharing our culture, we're sharing our way of life, we're guiding their processes. We're providing them with the guidance on how to deal with us at the expense of what we do the rest of the day, right? So we're doing it off the side of our desk in coordination with Canada and the regulator, who are doing it for those same 8 hours a day. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that we're doing it in addition to, and they're doing it during that time. It's their actual job. And so I think one of the key components of the IMCs and the IACs is the recognition that the perspectives of the nations are being brought forward, not because, you know, the honorarium is so fantastic, but because there is a need for that to be brought forward. And the other side of that is a challenge, because those folks that we're providing that information to are there because they're paid to be there. And I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that they want to be there. I'm just saying that there's a difference between what we provide in our roles and what they partner with us on in theirs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would like to go to other panel members now to consider this question that Marcy has addressed. What do the IAC and IAMC do? And how does the relationship help to advance engagement and relationship building? And Kyra Northwest.
I think you're good. Hello, hello. Hello? I don't think it's good.
Here.
Oh, wait.
Raise the.
That's a little bad. Okay, wait, I think it's okay now. I think it just works position. Sorry. I'll just hold it. Hello?
No, I don't
Yeah,
think it's
good,
working. There you
good.
go.
Okay. So I can't really speak to the IAC. I only sit on the, sorry. Thank you.
I'm just gonna move
Hello? I'll just go to the podium, if that's what you do. Oh, it's working now. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Well, I can't speak to the IAC. I am not actively involved in any of the IAC's work, but as the IAMC, I feel that all of the people that are part of this committee have been appointed here from their nations and their leaderships, because I feel like they're all champions in the consultation world and the things that we do for our communities and our nations. And I think one big thing for the role that we take on is that we do try to create change. And one of the reasons why I joined this committee was that being a person that was working for my community, and having to learn all of this and having to start becoming a legal expert and an expert in archaeology and an expert in environmental science and learning about caribou and all these different things that we have to become experts in. And I just thought that it would be a way to help those people that are in those positions and try to make it better for them. People like Violet and Ira and Carol and all these people that we've built these relationships with, doing this work. And I think that if I wasn't, that those same people I would hope would call me out and tell me what I need to do and tell me what they think that we need to be working on. And I think that that's really fundamental, is that I've built those relationships to do that, to serve as that purpose, that these people can come to me and talk to me and tell me what issues are they seeing, what are things we should be focusing on, because I trust them, because we're all in the same position. And I think that if we're not helping each other, who's going to do that for us? So in light of that, I thought that joining this would be a way to make things better for people that are in those same positions. But I think too, one of the things, the big takeaways for our role is that we learn these processes, we learn all these approaches and try to fix them in some way, try to make them better in some way, that in the end that things get easier down the line. And it does take time and it does take process, but at the end of the day, that's why I sit on this. And that's what I feel our role is that we try to create this change. Although it's not instant, it's something that we know needs to happen. It has to happen, and it's going to continue to happen. So yeah, I think that's kind of my piece. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from Richard? Yeah. Richard is second, yes. Go
Just
ahead.
waiting for, okay, good. One of the things that I was thinking about with, I don't know anything about the IAC, just from Marcy or from Pegan that they sit on it, and no further. They don't talk to us at the, it's not that they should, but we're just far removed from that. We're arm's length from that. And I do hope that they do good work. But for the IAMC, one of the things that I hope that we can do with the chiefs and with our participants, the technicians, is to identify a commonality in what we can do. And this is an opportunity. Just like Kyra, I am here to learn, here to identify problems, but also understand those problems as we work towards solutions. And so when you think about the IAC, the Trans Mountain Committee, the Line 3 Committee, and then the CERs Committee with the IAC, I think it's time for the Indigenous caucuses of those groups to get together and talk about what our hopes are. What is our end goal? What can we do to help and affect change for rights holders? And that's one of the things that I do think about just with the IAMC. As we work on the side of our desk, I think there's a lot more things we can do, which is organize these relationships that we talk about. They don't exist unless we're at the table. And I think these opportunities that, as Canada tries to fumble around with how do you include First Nations people in the regulatory processes and how do you affect change, and our advice goes to hopefully change the legislation that will give rights holders more power and authority over oversight. And I know the IAC is not that. We have more access to the chiefs, we have more access to technicians, we have more money to do studies, we're always learning about something, and it's us to organize and brainstorm and provide those solutions, and those solutions have to be delivered in a way that gives advice to government, and that advice gets filtered through the CER. And of course, it all boils down to what Mike Oka says, is that we only gave up the depth of a plow, and that's basically where we should start. As Indigenous people, as Indigenous caucus, we just need to identify that and say it. That's that uncomfortable conversation that needs to occur. And these agencies that have been created over time to manage the sovereignty of Canada, I do agree, we need to manage our own sovereignty as Indian people, as Indigenous people. And that's what I hope that we can learn from things like the IAC and the IAMC with Trans Mountain Line 3 and the CER. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll go to, we have two speakers left, Jonathan and then Mike. So Jonathan will go.
I guess for me, you know, it's the same as Richard, like, and you know, I'm glad that we have members of our IMAC sitting with the IAC, with the CER. I mean, we have to be in every room, right? So it's important that we have the two individuals playing that role for us and relating, you know, what they do back to us. So that helps us in what we have to do. But I look at myself as also kind of like a moderator, facilitator, a go-between between our nations and the IMAC and the Secretariat, as well as industry and government. But it's frustrating and it's a real struggle. You know, how do we communicate what's going on here back to our communities in Manitoba? I know Swan Lake is heavily participating all the time because the pipeline goes through their community. But to get the other communities to the table in Manitoba, even before construction, I think Barb, you know, is right that many of them were not participating because they don't have the capacity, they don't understand. So how do we work to achieve that goal of participation? You know, and bringing people to the table to help educate each other, you know. And for 2 or 3 years now, I've been saying this to Enbridge, I've been saying this to NRCan, that one of the ways I think I would like to look at, you know, how can I take this position further to help benefit our First Nations communities in Manitoba? And I always talk about a regional body, you know, and so that we could have at least 3 or 4 meetings a year with First Nations leadership, with land users and so on, in regards to the impacts. Our grandmothers, Deadly Kookums, you know, they're worried about their future, you know, the future of water and the aquifers in Manitoba. Manitoba is a province of water. Water is life, right? But the communication process, the education process, unless there is money to be made, very seldom you're going to see leadership at the table, because they want to help advance their community with economic opportunities. But when it comes to the environment and issues like this, where now the pipeline's been built, you know, what do we do? What is the benefit? Well, we have to change that perspective, but we can only do it through education. And, you know, like Enbridge, they have the money. The oil is flowing. I haven't seen them since the day it started, you know? So why are we not holding their feet to the fire to say, help us with this? Give us the resource. You have the money. We don't have the money. You haven't given us anything, but give us enough to help start to educate the rest of our First Nations communities that are impacted by this line in our province, so we could build that capacity, so we could educate our people, so that when the next time a project like this comes through, we have not 13 First Nations at the table in Manitoba, but all 26. Because that's the only way we're going to benefit our communities, through education, involvement, and participation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we'll hear from Jonathan Timlin on that last question.
Yeah, you know, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to kind of maybe say some final comments.
Don't always look at me, John.
I'm actually looking at Richard's hat. It's, you know, it's I'm loving it. No, I guess it's what all of you spoke about, right? Like the comments that you guys, the comments you all spoke about was really about the power imbalance. I think it's fair to say there's always been a power imbalance that exists, where companies and government held the power and nations didn't have it, right? And now I think what we're trying to do with all of these different entities, whether it's, you know, the Indigenous Advisory Committee to the CER that is able to give direct advice to our board of directors about strategy, about what should the regulator be doing to be a better regulator. And that's direct advice. And Chief Pegan's been at the table in that conversation, Marcy. You know, then there's the IMACs, and the IMACs, both for Line 3 and TMX, direct boots on the ground, you know, out Indigenous monitors out with our inspection officers collaborating on inspection of existing infrastructure. And then you have other changes, like when the CR Act was put into place, there was a requirement that a minimum of one of our decision makers, one of our commissioners, has to be Indigenous. It's a minimum. There can be more, and I believe there are more on the commission. Similarly, with the board of directors, there's a requirement that a minimum of one of the board of directors has to be Indigenous. Again, just a minimum. But all of this cumulatively just means that there's way more opportunity to be in the decision-making rooms. And I think that's part of addressing the power imbalance. It's not the only thing. Like, I agree with your point about education. I agree with your point about, you know, more meaningful engagement and consultation and relations. Like, all of these points are really important points, but it's I don't think, I guess when I was listening to Marcy and you know, Marcy was talking about the benefits of both the IAC and the IMAC, what I kept hearing was, wow, do we ever need both of these things? You know, we need the boots on the ground, the direct involvement of nations and the oversight of a project. We absolutely need strategy of the organization to be informed by an Indigenous voice, and that's what you have through the involvement of First Nations and Métis and Inuit on the Indigenous Advisory Committee. So all of these things really matter. And the one thing that I'm really alive to is that we're stretching people really thin. You know, like there's so much demand on your time now. And Marcy's right. Like, you guys are doing this kind of on the sides of your desk. Richard's a counselor. You know, there's enough, Chief Pegan, Chief Cadmus, there's a number of people here who have so many other, Tribal Chief Arcon, who you were talking about, you know, homeless issues in Saskatchewan. Like, there's so many demands in your time, and that's a reality that's right. You know, so part of that also is bringing more people in who are Indigenous into our fold. So it's not just a bunch of white people, European background, whatever, making decisions on projects. It's people within the organization who help, you know, who are participants in our work, decision making. I'm also hungry. I apologize, Marcy. I think maybe someone should. Jade.
I want to thank you. I know it's been a long day for a lot of you, and so I just wanted to go around the panel with any final words from our panel, and then we're going to ask our elder to do the closing prayer. So he'll be doing the closing prayer, but just a word of reflection. And we'll just start maybe with Mike. What have you thought of this evening? And what is the takeaway from this evening would be one of the questions.
I think there's a couple of things, you know, we got to quit fighting for the scraps. You got to start working together all across Canada, Turtle Island. And whereas Chief Cabinet Delorme says, and we have to develop an end game as we move forward, you know, and if that means challenging NRTA or something like that, then that's something that we have to do. You know, I take a look at our community and all the resource extraction around us in the Interlake region of Manitoba. And we have nothing. We have no benefits. We have no impact benefit agreements. There's no accommodation measures. So right now, everybody else is making money on us but us, on the natural resources in our own backyard. So we have to start looking at how can we work together as nations across this country to improve that for our people, but not just our people, but more importantly, our future and our children. Because if we don't start working together, as Mike says here, then we're never going to get anywhere. 10 years, like I've been listening to NRTA talks for 10, 15 years, going to gatherings, but nobody's put action to words, or words to action. And I think it's about time we have to change that and start working together to accomplish what we want. And that's the share of those revenues, right? Because once we start that process, then that leads to self-sufficiency. And that's what we talk about when we, you know, I'm not so much worried about the treaties or UNDRIP or reconciliation or TRC. I'm worried about, like, I want to see, you know, how we come and we talk about what do you call, not just Aboriginal title, but sovereignty, being responsible for our actions, being responsible for the future of our communities and our natural resources and managing them. That's our future. You know, we've listened, we fought around the treaties for over 100 years already. Now we have UNDRIP and TRC and all these other things, reconciliation, words thrown into the mix. We can't forget about sovereignty, because to me, that's our future. That's where we lie. And we're nations within this nation. And we have to start showing that and proving that to the rest of Canada and our communities. Thanks, Miigwech.
Thank you. And our chair, Richard, any final words
Yeah.
for this evening?
Is it working? Okay. Hi. So one of the takeaways for me is thanks to Chief Lynn Acus for the comments about standardization and consultation being a waste of time. You know, when I first was given this portfolio, you know, I would get a duty to consult notification through fax or email or a letter, and then you kind of, oh, they're building a sewage lagoon. Do we have any land near there? You go check the land description. Oh, no. So you kind of get this superficial process of consultation that it doesn't matter what we do, they're going to do what they're going to do anyways. And it's just a checkbox. There's no real solid oversight. There's no decision making, you know, with the Yahi and the Blueberry River cumulative effects kind of, you know, in the end, one of the things I'm going to steal from Mike Sutherland is that, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And in the end, First Nations, if they have the capacity and the monetary ability, they can challenge anything they want and they'll win. And so when it comes to reconciliation, that's the takeaway for me. And it's not just reconciliation as putting your best foot forward. It's really measuring the response from government, the response from agencies. You measure the acceptance level at which they take in what our advice means and what they've learned. And some of that involves worldview, some of that involves culture, but most of it really just involves getting in the same room and making decisions together. So that's a takeaway from me. Thanks.
Thank you. Kyra Northwest.
Okay, there we go. I think my key takeaway is I was really glad to get feedback and questions from leadership. And I think that the question that Chief Cadmus asked was the response that the counselor from Swan Lake gave us. What's the end goal? If that's what it sounds like, what the end goal needs to be eventually is that there's some type of Indigenous regulatory body or working alongside the CER as an Indigenous regulatory body and co-making those decisions. And I think that that was a key takeaway in having those discussions and having those questions, because that's what we need to hear. That's what we need to hear as committee members to be able to grow and to know like the needs of the nations and what are our leaders looking at? What are their priorities for us as an IMC? And I think, and I'm really glad to hear that. So that was my key takeaway. So thank you for that. Hi.
And Marcy Riel, some final thoughts on takeaway.
Besides, I should have eaten first. Okay, so I think two things. One is what I'm supposed to say, which is that I greatly appreciate that all of you took the time to be here today, which is entirely true. I do. What I think is really interesting, though, is the difference between the Line 3 process with decommissioning finished and the current status of all of the project components and the other IAMC project that is just down the hall in this very moment, that had the minister there and a leadership table and a process for meaningful change. I believe that this committee, as the first of its kind, intended for all of that to happen. I believe that this committee and the folks who were on the first term of the committee and the second and who are still here in the third are committed to finding a way to make that happen. And if anything, I would say that my takeaway from this evening is that, to Barb's point, there are many new faces in this room. And I'm thankful for that, because
the only way to actually achieve what we originally set out to accomplish 5 or 50 or 100 years ago, through this committee and, you know, confederation, is by having the nation's push for that meaningful change to happen. There's only so much the committee can do in building that relationship with Canada and the regulator. To the point that leadership has made by a number of leaders, it has to come from the nations, and it's about drawing that line in the sand and saying, like, this isn't good enough anymore. And credit to the CER and to Canada, I believe that if we found a way to be less relationship driven and more adversarial on this committee, we might make some of that happen a bit faster than we have, because clearly it's possible, it's happening down the hall. So I would say it's a conversation that we need to have. And so one of the things that I would suggest in terms of takeaways is that as a committee, we need to find a way to make the things that we prioritized what seems like forever ago actually happen. And I appreciate that those of you in the room are the people who can actually help us accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy.
Let me just pull back.
And Jonathan Timlin,
Yeah.
key takeaway.
Sure, just, key takeaway I've heard from other people, councilors, others, we've got work to do. We've got to continue to plow ahead. And I hate to use the plow metaphor, sorry about that. You know, it's important that we just continue to keep our focus on the UN declaration, our focus on achieving what the committee set out to do. And that means, like, I know my colleagues over there at the table in the back from the CER, like, we're really committed to this. Yeah, we're not always perfect, we're not always getting it right, but showing up is really important, and continuing to work at it. It's really important. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd like to call up our elder, Gilbert Francis, for the closing prayer. I think my reflection on this evening is that, and I'm glad one of my other brothers from the north is here, Ray Cardinal. I think when we come together, we can stop the country. What I mean by that is Ray's late father and my late father put together a little document called the Red Paper. They wrote Citizens Plus. We stop the government cold. That type of vision is needed today. So when we do come together, we can get our way. So I ask the elder to pray over us, ask for guidance, that we can make it through the night, come back in the morning, continue all your work. Our elder Gilbert Francis. For those who want breakfast, and Enbridge will be providing breakfast, and I also want to ask you to come and get some of the swag on the side of the room here. So come and get a hoodie, come and get a thermos, come and get a toque, some other materials that are donated by the IAMC committee. Thank you. And you may collect your honorary check at the registration desk. Registration desk, honorary check. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you.